We've covered a panorama of macro forces: technological, economic, demographic, geopolitical. You might be asking, how do these tie into human flourishing and the on-the-ground challenges people face? This brings us to Chapter 2 of our exploration: the socio-cultural stressors that are testing the resilience of individuals, families, and communities. If the first chapter painted the backdrop of large-scale change, this second chapter zooms in on the lived experience, the stresses and strains many are feeling in daily life, often as side effects or second-order effects of those macro trends we discussed. I want to stress that these socio-cultural issues are deeply interlinked with the economic shifts. They feed into each other, and they have profound implications for the mission of the Church, because they concern the core of human well-being, our minds and relationships, our homes and sense of belonging, our hopes and sense of purpose. Let's examine a few of the most pressing stressors: the mental health crisis, the breakdown of family structures, housing and migration pressures, the disruption of educational and career pathways, cultural polarization, and the curious case of declining labor force participation. Each of these is like a point of pressure on the body of society. Feeling one alone is difficult, but many people today experience several simultaneously. Mental health crisis, the invisible epidemic. A first critical stressor to discuss is the mental health crisis. Over the past decade or more, and especially exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, rates of mental health challenges have climbed dramatically. We now regularly hear the word crisis used by public health officials, educators, and employers when talking about mental well-being. Anxiety disorders, depression, and related issues are surging across nearly every demographic, but they are particularly pronounced among young people. To give a sense of scale, in the United States, roughly 1 in 5 adults lives with some form of mental illness in a given year. That's tens of millions of people in our pews, people in our pulpits, and certainly people outside our doors in need of hope and help. Depression and suicide rates have been especially troubling. Suicide is now a leading cause of death for teenagers and young adults. In fact, youth surveys have revealed heartbreaking trends. For example, a majority of teenage girls in one recent national survey reported persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness. Think about that. More than half of our young women are carrying deep, continual despair. And it's not only girls or only youth. The crisis extends to middle-aged adults who are experiencing high rates of deaths of despair from suicide or substance overdose, and to communities like our veterans, our farmers in rural areas, and others under chronic stress. What's driving this mental health epidemic? It's a complex tapestry of factors. Social media and digital hyperconnectivity certainly play a role. Young people are bombarded with curated images of others' perfect lives, leading to loneliness and low self-esteem, and they are often navigating an online world rife with cyberbullying and unrealistic expectations. The breakdown of community and in-person social bonds, which we'll discuss further, means many are left without strong support networks. Stigma around mental illness, though it has lessened somewhat, still prevents many from seeking help early. The pandemic poured fuel on the fire. Isolation, grief from loss of loved ones, economic anxiety, and educational disruption all contributed to psychological strain. Biologically, some point to increased substance abuse, like the opioid crisis, exacerbating mental health issues, as well as even possible links between physical health factors, diet, sleep deprivation, etc., in modern life and our mental state. For our purposes, what matters is recognizing that mental health is foundational to human flourishing. If someone is depressed, they struggle to hold a job, to maintain relationships, to find meaning, all elements of a flourishing life. Anxiety and trauma can trap people in cycles of fear and reactivity, making it hard to grow or contribute positively to society. This is personal for ministry, because the church historically has been a community of soul care. People have always brought their inner hurts to pastors and fellow believers, whether in the form of despair, addiction, familial strife, or existential angst. But now the scale is unprecedented. Pastors often find themselves on the front lines of a mental health battle they may feel ill-equipped to fight. Counseling needs have spiked. It's not uncommon for clergy to report that a huge portion of their week is taken up by crisis counseling or trying to connect members to professional help. And clergy themselves are not immune. Pastoral burnout and depression are real concerns, especially as they bear others' burdens while dealing with their own. The mental health crisis also offers an opportunity for ministries that are willing to innovate. We see an emergence of church-based support groups focusing on mental wellness, partnerships between congregations and mental health professionals to provide services, or simply a greater openness in preaching and teaching to talk about anxiety, depression, and the hope that faith can offer without resorting to platitudes. Notably, many younger people are far more willing to talk about mental health openly. A church that is conversant in this language can build trust with a generation that often feels misunderstood by institutions. It's important to mention that this mental health burden is not only in affluent nations. In emerging markets and poorer countries, there has historically been a tendency to focus on infectious diseases or malnutrition, very tangible health issues. But data shows that mental illness is a massive and growing part of the global disease burden everywhere. In many developing societies, rapid urbanization and social change are contributing to increased stress, and issues like depression frequently go undiagnosed and untreated due to stigma or lack of services. For example, some research in South Asia has found high rates of farmer suicides linked to economic stress and climate impacts on agriculture. In parts of Africa, communities dealing with conflict or HIV/AIDS have deep layers of trauma. Often the church or mosque or temple is the only accessible support system, as formal mental health care is scarce. So, globally, faith communities are bearing a lot of this load, whether they realize it or not. Acknowledging mental health as a real issue, not a character weakness or purely a spiritual failing, is a vital shift that leaders worldwide are making. We can bring a theology of hope, yes, but also practical compassion and referrals to therapy when needed. To truly foster human flourishing, we have to treat the mind and soul with the same earnest care we've historically given to the body. Family structure breakdown, fragile foundations. Alongside mental health, another social foundation is under strain, the family. We use the term family structure breakdown to describe the well-documented changes and stresses in how families are formed or not formed and sustained in contemporary society. In the U.S., the picture has changed radically over the past few generations. Marriage rates have declined significantly. People are marrying later, and many are not marrying at all. Birth rates have fallen to record lows, which is one reason for the aging trend we discussed. Perhaps most notably, more children are growing up in single-parent households or in unstable family arrangements. Today, only about 2/3 of American children live with two married parents, an arrangement that used to be the norm for nearly 90% of kids back in the 1960s. About a quarter of children in the U.S. live with a single parent, usually the mother, which is a higher proportion than in virtually any other wealthy nation. Additionally, there's an increase in children being raised by grandparents or other relatives, especially in communities hard hit by issues like incarceration or the opioid epidemic that have taken many parents out of the picture. It's important to state that loving single parents and diverse family setups absolutely can and do raise wonderful, well-adjusted children. The concern is not to stigmatize those families, but rather to recognize the added stresses that tend to accompany these trends. Single parents often juggle jobs and parenting with little support, leading to economic hardship. Single-parent families have substantially higher poverty rates as a group. Children in these situations might lack the time and resources that two-parent households can more readily provide, such as supervision, help with schoolwork, or access to extracurricular opportunities. Even in intact families, work pressures and social isolation can lead to less quality family time. Some families also experience breakdown due to high conflict, not just formal divorce. Homes where trauma or abuse occurs are also part of this picture of family fragility. The ripple effects are profound. Family instability is correlated with a host of challenges, from lower educational attainment to behavioral and emotional problems in children, to greater likelihood of poverty in adulthood. Essentially, when the foundational support system of the family falters, individuals often carry scars that affect their ability to flourish later on. The reasons behind family breakdown are multifaceted. Cultural norms around marriage have shifted. It's more socially acceptable now to have children outside of marriage, for instance, or to cohabit without marrying. Economic pressures play a role too. As working-class wages stagnated over decades and job security declined, many young people felt less confident in establishing and sustaining a family. In some communities, a shortage of marriageable partners, for example, areas where many young men are either incarcerated, unemployed, or dealing with addiction, leaves women raising children alone because the partnership prospects are bleak. There is also a narrative of individualism that has its pluses and minuses. People value personal fulfillment and autonomy, which is positive, but it can mean less willingness to persevere in relationships or to sacrifice for the sake of family cohesion, especially if they lack models of stable family life themselves. For church leaders, this trend hits home in numerous ways. Practically, many of our ministries and programs have long assumed a traditional family unit. Think of curricula that say, "Have your parents help with this?" or events that cater to stay-at-home moms, or father-son retreats and mother-daughter teas. These aren't bad, but they may miss a large and growing segment of people who don't fit the mold or who feel left out by such framing. We have children coming to Sunday school whose parents might not be together, or who might not even be in the picture at all. How do we support that child spiritually and emotionally when their home life may be chaotic or lonely? How do we support the exhausted single mom in our pews who might love to volunteer or join a small group but simply has no time or childcare? The church has an opportunity, even a calling, to become a surrogate family in many respects. In fact, this has always been part of the Christian ethos. God sets the lonely in families, as the Psalm says. But now it must be very intentional. Ministries like providing mentors for children without involved fathers, creating social groups that are inclusive of single adults, not just couples, offering parenting classes or emergency financial assistance, all these practical steps become part of the mission. Moreover, churches need to carefully navigate moral teaching on family in a context where many have experienced brokenness firsthand. There's a pastoral sensitivity required, upholding the importance of healthy, loving family relationships, which research and scripture alike affirm as important for human well-being, while extending grace and belonging to those who have walked a different path or been wounded by family breakdown. The reality is that many in our congregations carry pain: the divorcee who feels stigmatized, the youth who has a trust deficit because dad walked out, the grandparents quietly grieving that their grandkids rarely visit due to a rift. Understanding these realities helps us preach and lead in ways that bring healing rather than heaping on guilt. On an international note, family structures are also changing globally, though at different paces. In many emerging economies, extended family networks used to be very strong, multiple generations under one roof, communal child-rearing in villages, etc. Urbanization and migration have eroded some of that. For instance, when a young man from a rural village moves to a big city for work, or abroad, he's not around to help his parents or his siblings' kids. There are countries where a significant portion of the parenting generation is abroad as migrant laborers, Consider the Philippines, where many mothers work overseas as caregivers or maids, sending money home but leaving their own children in relatives' care. War and disease have also torn at family fabric in certain regions, leaving many orphans, the HIV/AIDS epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, or the toll of conflicts in Syria or Congo. So family breakdown isn't just a Western issue, it's manifesting globally, albeit in diverse ways. And everywhere the church is often one of the few institutions people turn to when their family fails them, whether that's an orphan finding a home in a church sponsorship program in Nairobi, or a single father finding community in a men's group at a U.S. church. Missional leadership must thus be attuned to both the pain and potential in this domain of family.